Hello and welcome to Pause for Pedagogy, a conversation with Trisha Teig. My name is Dan Jenkins and I am Chair and Associate Professor of Leadership and Organizational Studies at the University of Southern Maine and co-editor of Pause for Pedagogy. The International Leadership Association and I are thrilled to welcome Trisha to our latest conversation in the Pause for Pedagogy series. Welcome, Trisha.
Hello.
And I'd love if you would begin by just sharing a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am a visiting teaching assistant professor in leadership studies at the University of Denver. I teach in the Pioneer Leadership Program and also in the Colorado Women's College Women's Leadership Scholars. And those are both leadership minor programs that I teach in. And I have most recently come from Florida State University, where I got my doctorate in higher education. And yeah, I'm originally from Texas, and I'm having a great time in Denver. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you, Trisha. And always glad to share the screen with another fellow Seminole. So go Noles. And so very interested in this learning activity that you profiled in your article here, and love to learn a little bit more about it. And just for our watchers, our viewers, we're looking at social justice education and pedagogy as our theme for 2019, and this was a great way to start us off. So, Trisha, what key question or questions were you hoping to answer when you were putting together this article?
Yeah, I was really interested in sharing my story in order to unpack the purpose of sharing stories as an important pedagogy, especially in terms of social justice education. And I wanted to focus on how I could, in sharing my story, give resources to other leadership educators about incorporating this type of content into the curriculum. Specifically, I think that we're having an uptick in the conversation about how important it is to talk about social justice, to talk about critical pedagogy in the leadership classroom. But I don't think that we have had as many conversations about the how, about what actually happens whenever you do this, and what someone's experience might be. And so that's really what I was trying to focus on in this article.
Yeah, thank you. And I like particularly in the article, you really challenge the reader to to take that risk and that leap of faith, and to have those types of dialogues that look at critical pedagogy and critical theory, and provide some resources for doing so. How did you find yourself coming to a comfort level with some of those discussions? I guess, and kind of piggybacking off of what you share in the article.
Yeah, it honestly came with a lot of practice and a willingness to have some conversations with people who had also been doing this type of work. I was really fortunate at Florida State to be surrounded by educators and scholars in both the curriculum and co-curriculum who were really focused on social justice education and leadership education as connected. And so I came into that space with a knowledge that I wanted to learn more. And when I started learning from my peers at Florida State, I was able to put that more into practice in the classroom. And I think that also came with an understanding of the necessity of it. So I really emphasized in the article, I don't think that you can teach leadership if you're not talking about social justice. And I really believe that it's hard to do if you're not trying to focus on critical pedagogy. And I think those two things, I was kind of steeped in learning about that through my time and experience at Florida State. I read a lot. I have a huge academic crush on Bell Hooks, who has really influenced my teaching because she emphasizes the idea that it's unrealistic for us to walk into a classroom and think that we can just ignore power systems. And if we do ignore it, then we're just perpetuating the problem with that system. And so by calling attention to it through some different interactive ways to engage, through emphasizing learning from everybody that's in that space, we're more able to deconstruct those power systems and call attention to them, and I think learn in a better way.
I love that. Yeah, and certainly that starts with having that conversation, that dialogue, that co-inquiry in the classroom to unpack that and go to those deeper levels. So tell me a little bit more about the Our Stories, Our Voices learning activity that you discussed in your article. Where did that idea come from? I noticed that it was a couple iterations of teaching that particular class that you mentioned in the article before you decided to give that a try. So yeah, please share.
Yeah. So I did start the Our Story, Our Voices from the very first time I taught gender and leadership. I knew that I wanted some sort of assignment that was focused on other people's stories, on everyone's stories, and on how we could share those in a way that allowed us to know each other better and build trust and a bond so that we could have difficult conversations in the class. But what I realized after teaching it 2 semesters was even though I wanted to put it at the end of the semester so that people could feel more comfortable in sharing, that actually then meant that they weren't able to form that bond earlier on. And that was feedback that I got from the students. It really actually surprised me that students were willing within 3 weeks of knowing one another to share really deep experiences about who they were as an individual, because that's what the assignment was all about. And then because of that experience, they were able to have a really powerful conversation throughout the rest of the semester and in learning about social justice, about why we need to deconstruct some of these different issues. So the assignment itself was needed earlier on in order for us to have those conversations.
Yeah, it seemed like it from the way it was depicted in your article that it really built some rapport immediately for the students in that class. And you know, I was just reading an article that came through my feed yesterday from Fast Company, and funny in collaboration with Post-it, and they were talking about, you know, getting rid of some of the more you know, ludicrous type of icebreakers and things, and doing things that were more intentional and or things that were tied more so to the learning outcomes or objectives of the course, as opposed to just, you know, making people feel silly. But obviously there's times where you want to take people outside of their comfort zones. But in this particular case, you know, when you're discussing you know, gender issues and other issues with respect to, you know, power and influence and systems and whatnot, that it becomes important to find an activity where there's some common ground, but also it scaffolds and gets you to that, you know, to those conversation points that, or not necessarily conversation points, but areas of conversation that are going to be important if they're going to explore the content and the learning outcomes deeper in the course. And so that has me thinking about, you know, so what were some of the other or tangible learning outcomes for this learning activity, and, you know, how did you assess whether they were met?
Yeah, you know, I was really intending for this particular assignment to be about the relationship building and about students being able to make connections with one another that they wouldn't be able to do just by talking to each other on a surface level in maybe a traditional classroom type space. And so it was very untraditional in terms of learning outcomes, because I never graded this assignment beyond saying, if you show up and present something, you get the points. And I also made it a very small point in comparison to the rest of the course level. Like, it was only worth, I believe, like 6 points out of a 100-point class. And that was really purposeful because I didn't want them to, I didn't believe that I could ever assess the level of what their story was one way or another. I don't think that that was the intention of the assignment. And so I wanted them to feel freedom in knowing that really the credit is not the point. The point is for you to come in and be yourself and reflect really thoughtfully about where you have come from, based on your identities, based on your family, based on where you grew up, and tell us a story about what that means about who you are. And I was nervous initially at whether or not students would just blow it off, because I didn't put that much, you know, emphasis in terms of like, you're getting graded and it's a big point of your grade or whatever. But they instead really embraced it and gave feedback that because the assignment wasn't emphasizing the grade, it was actually a freeing experience for them. And they knew that they didn't have to be something. They didn't have to meet a particular standard that was in my head, and instead could just show up as themselves. And that meant that honestly, they showed up way better than I could ever have anticipated. I mentioned in the article, one of the students literally painted a portrait, a self-portrait. I mean, the amount of time she had to have taken to create this beautiful piece of art, I would never have gotten if I had simply put restrictions on it and said, okay, well, you need a PowerPoint presentation and you do this, this, and this, and these are the metrics you need to meet. So, so how I assessed it was really more along the lines of, did they show up and did they meet the expectation of making connection? And so it was more of a subjective observation that I saw in each class. And honestly, what I saw was, oh my gosh, I didn't know that we have a similar family history. We came from similar location, and how does that allow us to connect? We share challenges that you wouldn't have ever guessed if we had just, talked to one another and met in a kind of traditional classroom type space. So I think all of those things allowed me to assess it in a way to say, this matters. This is really powerful.
That's great. Yeah. And beyond, some of the things that you mentioned in the article or just recently shared, are there any tips or suggestions, recommendations you might give to a leadership educator that is looking to facilitate this exact assignment or a similar conversation at that part of the semester and in their leadership course or program?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I mentioned this in the article, but I will highlight it again, that the two things that are really important for this assignment is that I really did have to share it in a very vulnerable way, my own story,
right,
in order for the students to feel comfortable doing that. And I think that connects with deconstructing power systems. You show up as a person to them, which oftentimes as instructors we don't necessarily have. Whenever you share a really honest and authentic story, and students really verbalized how much that mattered to them feeling more comfortable doing it themselves. And then the other factor obviously is really be thoughtful about who you have in your class, how different students from marginalized populations might experience this particular assignment. I struggled with that particular factor every single time I did this assignment, because by no means did I want to cause more harm or make students of color, students that are trans or genderqueer, feel like they needed to tell anything about themselves that they didn't want to reveal, or any student. And I had to balance that with the factor of, but it's really important, and actually, engaged pedagogy encourages really sharing our lived experiences as significant factors of learning. So it's a part of learning, who people are, and also, that they have significant experiences that they can bring into a classroom space that we can all learn from, and that matters to being able to establish relationships, trust, and having those conversations moving forward. So I still kind of struggle with that. I think that it's a paradoxical situation of, I know that this could possibly be an issue, and you manage it and try to tell students in advance that it's totally up to them what they want to share, that they really need to be thoughtful about what that looks like. We talk about if you're going to share something that's maybe really hard, that you give people warning, especially if someone else has experienced something similar, and that might be traumatizing to them to think about again. So all of those things are talked about before you ever do the assignment.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, those are great recommendations. It can be very challenging, very difficult to facilitate those types of conversations when it's powerful, and the experience that students can have, and the learning and development they can certainly have through going through those experiences is powerful. But it's it's arduous for the instructor to prepare and to make sure that the resources are available, and I love what you said too about just giving some fair warning, a disclaimer, a heads up to their peers that, hey, I feel comfortable enough, or for whatever reason that they are going to share something that's very powerful, very deep for them, and that provides some guidelines for doing so in that space. So thank you.
Yeah.
So where do you see, future research or writing headed in this area? What are you writing about next?
Yeah, so I'm excited to work on a couple of projects right now. I have some data from the gender and leadership classes that I taught that are right now I'm in the analysis phase of, and I'm working with Dr. Kathy Guthrie actually on that data for us to do just kind of an exploration of what the students' experiences were. All the data is just written content of the students from the classes, so from reflections, written assignments, papers, and that sort of thing. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit and understand what happened in each class and how kind of to move forward the conversation of should we be having identity focused leadership classes, and how is that useful, and what do students take away from that, and what is their progression in learning. And then I'm also working in my current institution on a new research project that is comparing, I work with two different leadership programs, but they take the same leadership minor, so I actually teach the same classes, they're just separate programs. And so one program is co-educational program, men and women, and it's a little bit larger class size and that sort of thing. And then the other program is for women only, so it's a women's leadership program, and it focuses on supporting first generation students, underrepresented students at DU. And so I'm doing some comparison of the two classes and what their experiences are with the curriculum based on distinctions of race and gender and class size and how their cohorts build together and all of those different things.
Yeah, that's great. Is that something that you considered, or that you came to the visiting professorship with that project in mind, or is that something that kind of emerged once you got your teaching assignment?
Yeah, it emerged once I showed up and realized that I was going to be teaching the same class, but with very different groups. And I think I'm really intrigued by the conversation right now about how we're developing leadership programs for specific populations, and is that useful to do with particular affinity groups? Do we need to be focusing on women? Do we need to be focusing on students of color or underrepresented groups, especially at predominantly white institutions? What does that look like? And how can we be supporting different types of students in different ways through leadership education?
Very good. No, that's great. Anything else you'd love to share with our viewers about this process or the article?
I just really appreciated the opportunity to write, to be able to reflect on the experience, because often you think you've thought about it and you've moved on, you've gone down a different route, and you haven't really thought about what that process was in terms of your own learning. And so I really appreciated the opportunity to write that down, and I encourage other leadership educators to do the same, and also to please connect with me if they're at all interested in having conversations about anything that was in the article or in this interview, because I'm always really excited to talk about it. I'm obviously really passionate about leadership education, and I think that this is a really key conversation that we should be having collectively.
Super. No, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on this, writing the article, and certainly on the video interview. And thank you to our viewers for watching the video. And to close us out, Pause for Pedagogy is an initiative of the Leadership Education Member Interest Group of the International Leadership Association. And articles and videos are available at www.ila-net.org. And you can follow us on Twitter at @the_ILA. Thank you so much, and thanks, Trisha.
Thank you.